This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
This week on Unspun, the politics of transition. When the campaign is over, how do you put aside those hard feelings and welcome the opponent who defeated you? How do you hit the ground running if you're newly elected? And what is it like when you're suddenly on the outside looking in? Plus, I'll count down the top 5 things presidents and governors don't tell you about transition. In today's America, welcome to the spin game. Believe me, I know, I'm Pat McCrory. When I was governor and mayor, I played the spin game. I was played by the spin game. But aren't we all done being spun? Let's take the spin out of the world we're in, here on Unspun. Good evening, I'm Pat McCrory, and welcome to Unspun, the show that tells you what politicians are thinking, but not saying. For Donald Trump and his Republican supporters in Washington, winning is just the beginning. And while much of the focus will be on his first 100 days in the White House, it's the 76 days of transition before that, between the election and the inauguration, that will help determine how much Trump can do and how quickly he can do it.
Let me also express my tremendous appreciation for Susie and Chris, the job you did. Susie likes to stay sort of in the back, let me tell you. The ice maiden, we call her the ice maiden.
Most of America had never heard of Susie Wiles when Trump introduced his senior campaign advisor on election night. But later, Wiles was also named as Trump's new White House chief of staff. She'll be the first female ever in that position. The choice of Wiles is also a sign that transition isn't just about choosing people who are qualified, it's also about choosing people you can trust. Wiles is a Washington outsider, unlike some of Trump's former White House advisors who turned against him in this election. Transition is also about taking advantage of whatever honeymoon a candidate has after getting elected. Because once the honeymoon is over, voters want results, not excuses. They want you to keep those campaign promises that you made, and the promises by Trump, like fixing runaway inflation and stopping illegal immigration, will now need a plan and results. Campaigning is all about getting elected, but governing is about getting things done, and transition is about getting it right the first time. Because in politics, there might not be a next time. Joining us now to talk about the politics of transition in Washington and Raleigh is Rufus Edmonston, North Carolina's former Democratic Attorney General and Secretary of State, who also ran for governor against Jim Martin in 1984. Rufus also spent 10 years on the staff of North Carolina Senator Sam Ervin in Washington and was a lead attorney on the Senate Watergate Committee. Rufus, it's an honor to have you on Unspun.
Well, thank you so much, Governor.
And I apologize.
I enjoyed when you were governor of North Carolina.
Yeah, I wanted to let the audience know we're having a little technical difficulty, so we're having you talk on the phone and through Zoom at the same time, and I appreciate you adapting.
Oh, absolutely. You, at 83 years old, Pat, you learn to do a lot of things.
Well, it's a real honor to have you on. And first of all, what advice would you give to Governor-elect Stein in his transition at this time, especially going from a Democratic administration to another Democratic administration?
Okay, he's going to have to realize that he has to pick his own team. I know that from transitioning into Attorney General when 1974, as you recall. You have to realize it's your administration. You don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but you want advice from people. But you need to pick people that are going to have your philosophy, with whom you're very comfortable. And I think he's off to a good start because he has a good transition team of his chief of staff now as Attorney General, a very fine person that you knew as a state senator on the team. And I think he's off to a good start because the main thing is to listen to people that have been there before.
Based upon your experience, what mistakes or what are some lessons learned from previous transition, whether it be Cooper or McCrory or other previous governors, Perdue and so forth?
Waiting too late to get started. That is what I've noticed. And I think that Stein's off to a good start because he's already announced his transition team. And then if I were he, I would divide up the different agencies and get somebody that's an expert in each field, like health and human services, law enforcement. I've offered myself to help on the law enforcement because having been attorney general and growing up in a law enforcement family, and hit the ground running and be ready the day one when you're sworn in to start governing, which I think you did a good job of doing. There were no hiccups that I recall. Now, the national transformation, boy, that's another thing. I used to go to all the inaugurations, and we had a man named Bill Cochran, Pat, who was with Senator B. Everett Jordan, who was always in charge of transitions and inaugural activities, and things went smoothly. Now, on the national level, it's a much, much broader, more difficult thing for President Trump, but he seems to have already done the main thing. You choose your chief of staff. And it sounds to me like he's got a very good chief of staff, and things seem to be going well.
So the big difference in North Carolina since I was governor is now you have to get approved by the legislature, your cabinet picks. So
yes,
you've got a Republican legislature, a Democratic governor. What are some of the challenges there that you see now, which previous governors really didn't have a problem with?
And well, as you know, North Carolina has a very strong legislative body. Occasionally you have a little trouble with them yourself, even your own party. And I'm sure that Josh Stein will have some problems too. But the newest edition of having to have confirmation by the legislature is something that makes you choose people wisely. You need to think, okay, how is this confirmation going to go? Is this person so far out in left field or right field that there'll be trouble over there? And I would think that having on his team Senator Richard, he's the former state senator that you served with, can tell him some of the pitfalls of having to have confirmation of his appointees. And so it makes it difficult for a governor. However, it makes for better government, in my opinion.
So how do you balance the vetting which is needed with the loyalty that a lot of people have shown you, especially during the campaign season and during the election?
Well, you hurt a lot of feelings, I imagine. I'm already, my desk is about half full with people wanting me to pass their name along for certain positions here and there, and only a few people can be chosen. And it's a nice balancing act that Governor Stein will have to do, which I think he's learned in his terms as being Attorney General, that you have to balance things. You know, he's dealt with the legislature. As I said, in North Carolina, since the beginning of our republic in North Carolina, the legislature has been a very strong body, and in fact has more or less more power than the other two branches of government, as you well know.
So how do you balance the big money people who have contributed greatly to your campaign? This is both at the presidential level and the gubernatorial level, with the openings that you have. As you know, there are certain jobs the big money people get, the big ambassador jobs.
Absolutely. It's something that you hope that the people that gave you big money have good suggestions. You hope that they don't try to thrust themselves up on you just because they gave you huge sums of money. Now, I never had that problem, and I don't think you did either, because you had good people working with you. It's going to be very difficult for President Trump, in my opinion. I don't think it'll be very difficult for Governor to be Stein, because he seems to have a level head. He seems to be in the moderate form, in the Jim Hunt mold of being governor. And I think that you have to tell people from the very beginning that, look, you may have given me a huge sum of money, but the best way you can help me is to let me choose a cabinet that I can get through the legislature and that will produce for you and for me.
Well, you know, there's certain appointments later on down the road, the Wildlife Commission, the Department of Transportation, university boards and so forth, that are prime positions that a lot of the contributors, I know in my case, they wanted those positions. Is that a tough decision to make?
Isn't that amazing, Pat? When I thought I was going to be governor, the two positions that people wanted the most that asked me about before I got ran in the election for governor was Wildlife Commission and DOT. And you only have so many to go around. And of course, I have a notion that the legislature will even acquire more appointed power during this next session with Governor Josh there, and that he will have less appointments probably. So you just have to take it like it is and do the best you can, because you only have so few appointments, and you have to learn to try to help people when they get so disappointed, get through those rough times saying, if you want me to succeed, help me and understand what I'm doing.
In the remaining minute we have, there's a rumor out there, there's always been rumors, governors during election season promise everything or the same job to many, many people.
Oh, my. Well, that is not exactly true, because you've been there and I was almost there. And by the way, I loved working with Governor Martin. How many times you have someone beat you in an election and then you get elected and work with them.
Yeah.
He's one of the finest gentlemen I ever knew. And he's in the mold of, like you were very much like Governor Martin, a fine person. And you promise a lot of folks nothing before the election if you're wise.
That's exactly right.
And if you did, you have to go a little bit of praying every night.
Shame on you if you did promise something, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Rufus, Mr. Attorney General, it's a great honor to see you again and have you in Unspun. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed our times. We used to go to the races together.
God bless, buddy. Next up, PBS Charlotte's Jeff Sonyard takes Unspun on the street, asking Republicans about high expectations after a big win that many didn't expect.
Yeah, Republicans celebrating their election night victory here at GOP headquarters in Charlotte, and also talking about what they think the early days of the next Trump administration will look like. How quickly do you think President-elect Trump will move to make the changes he promised during the campaign?
I think he'll start first day, and I believe he's already started getting his cabinet and people in line.
I don't think he ever stopped. I think he's been moving and preparing since he left office.
You think the first 4 years taught him a lot about what not to do in the next 4 years?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And who, basically, besides what not to do, who is on his side and who is not.
What's your highest priority for the next Trump administration?
Make America safe again in terms of illegal immigration, and I emphasize illegal because, I think for most of us, we are all about legal immigration, but we want to maintain a rule of law. We want to maintain legal migration into this country.
First thing I want them to do is start drilling, because economically, when you get the petroleum system straightened out, and it's going to let costs go down. That's the first thing I think you should do.
What would you like the president to do first?
Free the Jan 6 prisoners.
What do you think about his choice as the first ever woman chief of staff?
Surprise, surprise.
In what way?
In the way that the Democrats have always been demonizing him as he's racist, he's sexist, he's this, he's that.
It's not about Republican versus Democrat. It's about good versus evil. And so it's sort of like the light went on. And once you see the light or the truth, you can't go back.
And then so I think a lot of people's eyes have been open. And so although his principles have remained the same, I think it's going to be received very differently, and a lot more acceptance is going to happen because of that.
Yeah, and while Republicans may differ on the details, most agree that whatever changes President Trump makes in his next administration, he'll probably make them quickly. Pat?
Well, thanks, Jeff. And so what do you think about the Trump and Stein transition? Email us your comments on the politics of transition to unspun@wtvi.org, or even better, send us a video and we might use it on the air. All right, tonight on our Unspun Countdown, we've got my list of the top 5 things presidents and governors don't tell you about transitions. Let's start out with number 5. Why some top-tier names don't make the cut. Well, let me tell you, vetting is very in-depth. So a lot of times vetting for potential candidates that a governor or president really wants might show things you don't want the public to know. It might include personal indiscretions or financial indiscretions. Another thing that often happens is there's just not a match between the appointee and the executive making the appointment. They just might not get along and think they can work well together. That's a major reason a lot of things don't work. In fact, when they don't work, what often happens is the governor or the president says, hey, listen, something happened, we can't select you. Why don't you tell the public now before you're turned down that you've withdrawn your name from consideration? It's an easy way out for both parties. Number 4. Lobbyists campaigning to get appointments for clients. What often happens here is, so people who are interested in a cabinet position don't want others to know about it, and they don't want to be rejected publicly. So what they'll do is they'll hire a lobbyist or get a lobbying firm to help feed the names to selection committee, or they'll even get the media to feed the name. No fingerprints, so if you're rejected, I had nothing to do with it, was never interested to begin with. Very interested behind the scenes lobbying for these positions. Number 3, selection committee members selecting themselves. Can you spell Dick Cheney? Dick Cheney was the head of the selection committee for President Bush. He selected himself for VP. An amazing coincidence, but actually the most powerful position is also to be on the committee that selects others, because often they select themselves for the best jobs. And number 2, top campaign officials getting the top jobs with direct access. A big thing here for a candidate and for the governor or for the president is, should I bring people from my campaign team and have them help govern? But the campaign team people want to be close to the president like they were close to the candidate who was running for president. So a big decision for people will be, will I actually be in the White House, or will I be across the street in the Eisenhower Executive Office building? A big part of that decision-making process is, how close will I be to the decision maker before I accept a job? And number 1, some appointments always go to the highest donors. It's usually the ambassador to England, the ambassador to France, the ambassador to Switzerland. I always wanted somewhere in the Virgin Islands, but I just couldn't afford it. PBS Charlotte's Jeff Sonnier joins me now for Unspun One-on-One.
So I never got a call from you when you were governor about an appointment.
No, we had done some vetting.
Yeah, you don't call the media members usually that cover you, I
correct.
suppose.
We gave you a soft landing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Hey, you were part of 2 transitions, both as an incoming and an outgoing governor. Let's talk about the incoming first.
Yeah.
You were considered an outsider in Raleigh when you were elected, just like Trump is considered an outsider in Washington. Does being an outsider make transition and, I guess, governing easier or harder?
Much harder, especially there had not been a Republican governor for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So almost the entire administration and many long-term appointments were Democrat. And what's interesting is, if you stay in a politically appointed job in North Carolina for over 10 years, it's yours to keep forever. So I had a lot of Jim Hunt's old appointments in my administration. I could have built a building just for them. But Governor Perdue was class act during the whole transition. We got along extremely well. She gave me a tour of the governor's mansion, which I'd never been in, and it went very, very smoothly.
Is it awkward? You mentioned all the Hunt appointees, the Democrats. Is it awkward trying to get along with folks who literally a week before, 2 weeks before, were smearing you and trying to make you look bad and trying to keep you from being elected?
Yeah, it can be awkward, but you put that behind you, and as we saw both Trump and Biden do in the Oval Office, they shook hands and they were very cordial with each other, and I think that's a very positive signal, and I compliment both of them. My biggest difficulty coming in was, frankly, with my Republican legislature, because my Republican legislature would have a lot of them would have preferred to have a Democratic governor, because they wanted to have total control anyway, and it's easier for them to fight a Democratic governor then a Republican governor coming in. In fact, one a very powerful senator never came to the governor's mansion the whole time I was there, regardless of many invitations. So that was interesting. Leaving was interesting. Governor Cooper and I had a very tough election, very close election. And we had I invited him and his wife to the mansion. We had very cordial conversation, but the transition wasn't easy because I read in the newspaper that he was going to get sworn in on midnight on January 1st or December. And that had never been done before, and I had to read about it in the newspaper. So that was kind of a rough beginning of that transition. And I hope Stein waits 5 or 6 days like I did for Governor Perdue and all other governors had done before. So that was a little awkward.
It's polite in front of the cameras. It's not always polite when the cameras aren't rolling or behind the scenes, is what you're saying.
No, I think that was polite. I mean, we were polite with each other, but
Right.
I think Cooper's staff decided we're going to get in there at midnight. And it was maybe disrespectful to the process at the time. I did not make a big deal of it, but I didn't agree with that at the time. It went against the tradition of how we do transitions in North Carolina.
When you're the outgoing governor or outgoing president, I suppose, what's the most important thing you want to do for the incoming person?
Give them the latest up-to-date information on some crisis issues. When I was leaving, we were dealing with the wildfire out west, and we were still dealing with Hurricane Matthew. And I wanted to make sure that Governor Cooper had the latest information because people's lives were still at stake on how the state responded. But the minute you're out, you're out. I mean, they dropped me off. They dropped me off at my driveway, and the Highway Patrol said, "I enjoyed it, Mr. Governor," and they disappear. And I had to load the boxes back into my house here in Charlotte, and my phone wasn't ringing off the hook, no doubt about it.
When it's Democrat to Democrat or Republican to Republican, I'm assuming for major issues, like, for example, the rebuilding of the mountains after Helene, that there's already plans being made on the part of Governor Stein, incoming Governor Stein.
I hope that's a major conversation between Governor Cooper and Governor-elect Stein, is because out west, I was just out there again last weekend. I'm going tomorrow, in fact, go help with a fundraiser for a lot of businesses that are really having a tough time.
Do you think a big problem like that you've got to cooperate on, do you think that's going to ease the transition of this Democratic governor with his Republican legislature?
It's easier, but in some ways, well, first of all, just because it's Democrat to Democrat, some of the previous Democrats, probably with Cooper, go, well, I expect Stein to keep me. Why don't you keep me? We're in the same party. But I'd agree with Rufus Edmisten. You got to bring your own team in.
Yeah. You talked about vetting with Rufus Edmisten. Is vetting for your team different than vetting when you're a candidate? I mean, are there different questions being asked now? Are they looking into other things besides just your financials and your personal life?
Yeah, they're looking the media. You know, now anyone can vet with you, just do Google. And like right now, Trump's appointments, especially his defense secretary, they're pulling out every clip they can because he was on Fox, gave a lot of speeches. I guarantee you the Democrats are going through every single video of him making any types of controversial statements. But I'm sure he'll get with it. Trump knows he has the Senate in control, and I'm sure he'll get his appointments through pretty quickly.
What do you make of what he said about Nikki Haley, making a point to say she's not going to be part of my administration? Thanks for your service, but it was polite, but it was definitely... It was
a semi-soft landing.
It was a message.
Yeah. It may have been a message, and it was the truth. He decided, even Pompeo's, who he had a great relationship with, he decided he wants new blood. He doesn't want any connection with the past administration that he had just 4 years ago with today, and that was obviously a very strong signal. He was respectful, but usually you don't say that in public.
When you've got that Republican Senate to help get your appointees through, does that mean that you can be more effective more quickly when you're president or governor?
Absolutely, and there's no doubt that the Trump administration is moving much quicker than they did in his first term. Remember, he was a novice coming in. Now he has 4 years experience, and that's going to make a difference. And I think he's got a little more mature team on the selection committee who know the ins and outs of politics. What is interesting is he is selecting a lot of people from Washington. Actually, current and former House members, which is quite interesting. A little different from his past administration. He's actually bringing in some insiders, except for one name called Musk.
Yeah, he's about as far outside as you can get from Washington.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Hey, I appreciate you taking the time. We're out of time, but that's this week's One-on-One.
When the results are in and you didn't win, well, that's when the reality sets in. That's the other transition that nobody's talking about or writing about. The transition from politics back to the real world. It starts right after Election Day. That's when the phone stops ringing. That's when your calls go straight to voicemail. That's when you're shamed and blamed and often canceled, sometimes even by members of your own party. It's brutal. 1 minute you're famous, the next minute you're ignored, or worse. Within days, some of your loyal donors actually start giving money to the opponent that beat you to gain future access. Your campaign team moves on to future candidates in future elections, or maybe there's a job, a media job, or a book deal in the future. For many candidates, the transition from politics back to the real world is also a real challenge. People still remember those negative campaign ads, even the ones that weren't true. Friendships are strained, family finances are drained, reputations are stained, and the impact of a tough campaign, the grief and anger and depression, can last a lot longer than the campaign itself. But elections aren't just about winning and losing. They're about fighting for something you believe is right, instead of just sitting on the sidelines and complaining about what's wrong. You know, it takes courage to run, knowing you might lose, to put your name and your reputation out there, to take time away from your family and your friends and even your job, just to join the debate that voters deserve to hear. Win or lose, that's what makes it all worth it, right? Trying to make a difference, trying to make things better. In politics, more voices mean more choices. So while we're congratulating the winners, how about a thank you for all the candidates who didn't win? They're not losers, not when just being on the ballot means a better election for all of us. Well, that's the reality as I see it. I hope you'll come back next week as we look at the politics of labels and language. Does changing what we call controversial policies or programs also change the way we look at them or vote for them? How politicians weaponize their words to spin public opinion. That's in our next Unspun, where we'll tell you what politicians are thinking but not saying. Good night, folks.
Production of PBS Charlotte.